This is my protostome video, and I chose to do it on snails. So snails, let's get excited. They are actually one of my favorite animals. For this presentation, I specifically narrowed it down to the common garden snail, which has common names like the land snail, the garden snail, and sometimes the California brown snail. The scientific name for this snail is Cornu aspersum, which is in the phylum Mollusca and the class Gastropoda. These are some of the most widely known terrestrial mollusks because they kind of are everywhere. Natural habitat, again, they're not very picky. They're pretty much everywhere. They'll live anywhere with adequate moisture, vegetation, and some places to hide. Among us in synanthropic habitats, meaning like man-made habitats like parks and gardens, they can pretty much reign free. Sometimes they multiply a little bit too well. And then in the wild, they live between rocks, coastal dunes, forests, groves, and bushlands, and even at elevations as high as 1,000 meters. So what do they eat? Any fruit, vegetable, grain, or tree or leaf really isn't safe. The garden snail is an omnivore, but some snails are carnivorous or even decomposers. Snails like foods with calcium because it helps them kind of strengthen and rebuild their shell. If they get crunched or like crushed or stepped on, snails can actually rebuild their shells by like secreting this like calcium-rich goo from their mantle, and then it kind of scars over like a skin scar that we get, but then it completely disappears and they're pretty much good as new. They're prey for lots of things like birds, snakes, toads, turtles, ground beetles, ground foraging mammals. Other snails that are carnivorous will eat snails and nematodes, and then they're also prey for humans because in places like the Mediterranean coast, people do eat snails and stuff like escargot. Snails have flexible jaws, and they eat with a band of thousands of microscopic teeth called radula, and you can actually hear snails eating. And that's what you're hearing is the radula like scraping along their food. And in the little diagram of the underside of a snail that I drew, you can see the radula underneath that like hinged jaw. So throughout evolution, snails have some traits that are common of the Mollusca phylum, which is that shell that protects the mantle and that like those inner organs, a muscular foot. And snails specifically have both sex organs. They can self-fertilize, and they have the ability to aestivate, which means that they can kind of retract all the way back into their shell and close themselves off if they need to. On the phylogenetic tree, they're pretty advanced for protostomes. On this specific one from National Geographic, you can see where the protostomes kind of diverge from the deuterostomes, and you can see that Mollusca and Annelida are the most closely related in their sister taxa. So the importance of snails in our ecosystem, they're really important. They kind of like help regenerate the soil. They're natural cleanup crew and recyclers. They eat dead and decaying vegetation. They also aid in fungal spore dispersal, and their shells are a good source of calcium for their predators in nutrient-deficient environments. And to us, they are food. Again, they're escargot. I included a recipe for escargot in this slide. I've had it before, not this specific recipe, but I've had it at a restaurant. Basically, it's just covered in garlic and butter and cheese and stuff like that, and then we'd eat it with bread. So that's pretty much what you're tasting. It's just something chewy in the middle. So I think they're pretty good. They are sometimes pests in large numbers, though, in California. Why they're called the California brown snails, because there's been pretty large infestations of the common garden snail. And one of the non-fiction books that I really like is called The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating, where it's an autobiography. It follows the author who she got this like disease that had her bedridden, and then she was able to watch this snail from a terrarium that was on her bedside table, and these are two quotes that I like from that. And then these are my citations, and thank y'all for watching. I hope y'all learned something cool.